in this part. Before planting herbs, or anything else, it's important to know a little bit about the conditions in your garden. In this part, we look at some of the factors that influence whether or not a plant will thrive, starting with the big picture, climate, and then narrowing down the focus to the different growing conditions in your particular landscape. Because designing an herb garden can be daunting, we walk you through the basics and offer some sample gardens. And if you're short on garden space, don't despair, herbs grow well in containers, too. Chapter 3, Getting to know your home ground. In this chapter, understanding your climate and weather, getting to know plant regions and zones, looking at origins, natives and exotics, finding the best spot for your garden. Location, words as important to gardeners as to real estate agents looking for a quick sale. Gardeners in Honolulu never fear having a frost, while gardeners in Barrow, Alaska, can expect less than a week of frost-free days each year. It's a big world out there, and where you live affects what herbs you can grow, how you grow them, when you grow them, and how successful you're likely to be. In addition to looking at the big picture, factors such as climate and topography, this chapter helps you assess your property and make sensible decisions about where your herbs will grow best. Climate is key. Climate has a lot to do with growing herbs successfully. You don't have to be a seasoned gardener to know that the backyards of Minneapolis, Minnesota, are not filled with 50-foot coconut palms and lush banana trees. Tropical plants can't survive winter in the far north. But do you know that sugar maples and birch trees won't survive in San Diego, Miami, or Houston? Heat limits what you can grow just as much as cold does. Most of us are pretty casual about the words climate and weather, but they're not the same thing. Climate refers to prevailing, or average, conditions. Weather is what's happening right now in your backyard. New Hampshire has a cold climate, but the weather today in Nashua may be hot and humid. Factors that influence what you can grow. Many factors influence your region's climate. Some of the most important are not latitude, elevation, wind, and proximity to large bodies of water. Collectively, these factors determine to some extent what you can grow and when you can grow it. There are ways to work with what nature has given you, see the later section, making the most of microclimates, but overall, your climate has a big influence on how you garden. Here's what you need to know about the factors that influence your region's climate. Latitude. In general, the farther north of the equator you live, the colder and longer winter will be, and the shorter your growing season. The latitude for Dallas is about 10 degrees south of Boston's. On average, gardeners in Dallas have about 60 more frost-free gardening days each year than people in Boston do. That may not sound like much, but 60 days is long enough to grow all the basil you'd need to make a winter's worth of pesto. Elevation. Latitude is only part of the story. The higher up you live, the colder it will be in both winter and summer, and the shorter the growing season. A good rule of thumb is that for every 300 feet of elevation, 10 garden days are lost. In fall and spring, those who live at low elevations get rain while those perched in the clouds get snow. These differences can occur only a few miles apart. It can be raining on the shores of Lake Champlain in Burlington, Vermont, elevation 100 feet. But snowing like crazy at the top of the ski lift in Stowe, 35 miles southeast of Burlington at an elevation of 3,700 feet. Wind. As a rule, winds in the United States blow from west to east. Mountain ranges can block the wind currents that push weather, or send it in unexpected directions. Live on the west side of the Cascade Mountains, for example, and you'll get all the rain you need and then some. Move to the other side of that range, where rain is as rare as a cat that comes when called, and you'll need extra watering cans in your tool shed. Weather fronts moving over large bodies of water usually pick up lots of moisture. Those coming from inland tend to bring little or no precipitation. Water. Large bodies of water typically affect weather by moderating it. If you're lucky enough to have an ocean front address or live on the shore of a good-sized lake, Your garden season is probably 2 or 3 weeks longer than that of someone who lives a couple hundred miles inland. And while your daytime temperatures in spring may be cooler, your chance of having nighttime frosts is reduced. Even small lakes can have these effects, albeit to a lesser degree. You can usually expect more precipitation if you live near a large body of water, too. Far northern and high elevation gardeners may have brief growing seasons, but most have the advantage of a winter-long snow cover. Snow is a great insulator, making it possible for some perennial herbs to survive in conditions far colder than they can without snow to protect them. Plus, a deep, insulating cover of snow protects plants from alternating freeze/thaw cycles that can damage roots. Weather matters. Climate dictates what's likely to grow in your locale, weather dictates what will grow right now. For example, statistics show that rainfall in Asheville, North Carolina, averages between 3 and 5 inches per month year-round, perfect for growing many herbs with little or no supplemental watering. However, in the last few years that region has experienced extended droughts, during which plants have withered without regular watering. Climate statistics are interesting and useful for planning, but keep in mind that your current weather conditions and the short-term weather forecast are what really matter to the plants in your garden, and they dictate what garden tasks you'll need to perform on a day-to-day basis. Using climate and zone maps. Some scientists study climate full-time, and there's data aplenty about the high and low temperatures, precipitation, and other climate factors for most of the country. This information can go a long way towards helping you decide what to plant and determine what type of care your gardens will need. To make the information easier to access, scientists have compiled this data into various maps. They used a hardiness zone map. The hardiness zone map, developed by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, divides North America into 11 zones based on the average annual minimum temperature. See Figure 31. Zone 1 is the coldest. The mercury dips below -50 degrees Fahrenheit in an average year. Zone 11 is the warmest. The average low is above 40 degrees Fahrenheit, 90 degrees warmer than Zone 1. Each zone, except Zones 1 and 11, is further divided into 2 subzones. The A subzone is, on average, 5 degrees colder than the B subzone. Garden authors cite zone ratings when they write about perennial plants. You don't have to worry about hardiness zones with annuals, because they live only for one growing season. You also see zone ratings given for perennials at nurseries and in plant catalogs. For example, rosemary usually is designated as a Zone 8 plant, which means you can grow it in your garden 12 months a year in Zones 8 and warmer, but it's unlikely to survive in Zone 7 and colder. If you want to keep your rosemary alive in Zones 2 through 7, you'll have to bring it inside in winter. Few folks even live in Zone 1, so the listings you see generally don't go below Zone 2. We say rosemary is usually designated Zone 8 because books, catalogs, and plant tags may differ on the zone ratings of individual plants. That difference of opinion is one reason why buying locally grown perennial herbs is a good idea. You know they'll be hardy. Keep in mind that the hardiness zone map is based on just one statistic, the average minimum temperature. And this is only part of the story when it comes to deciding what plants will thrive in your garden. Consider Mobile, Alabama and Tucson, Arizona. They're both in Zone 8. But Mobile receives an average of more than 60 inches of rain each year. The average rainfall in Tucson is a measly 12 inches. Determining your growing season. Except for gardeners living where the mercury never dips below freezing, most of us have a growing season, the time between the last spring and first fall frosts, that is far shorter than 365 days. As you might expect, gardeners who live in the north or at high elevations have the fewest days for growing herbs. The growing season in Fairbanks, Alaska, for example, averages 88 days, while gardeners in Tampa, Florida, often have more than 300 days between the last spring frost and first fall frost. The last and first frost dates aren't guaranteed. Those dates are based on 50% probability, which means there's a 50% chance that frost will come after the spring date and before the autumn date. Put another way, if you set out basil seedlings on the frost-free date of March 19 in Birmingham, Alabama, you have a 50% chance that they'll be killed by a late frost. Still, the dates are a useful planning tool. You just have to be prepared to protect tender plants. Visit the National Climatic Data Center website at www.noaa.gov/o/climate/freezerfrost/frostfreemaps.html to peruse the frost/freeze maps for your region. The length of your growing season affects how well some herbs will do for you, and how you should grow them. Even if your weather seems as hot as Hades, you may not be able to produce mature plants if you have a season shorter than 100 days. Most larger-leaf basils, for example, take about 3 months to reach full size. If your growing season is very short, you should start seeds indoors several weeks before the average last spring frost. Even warm-weather gardeners may want to begin indoors. Anyone can get a head start this way. The heat zone map. The average temperatures during your growing season also influence your herb garden. You have only 119 days between the last and first frosts if you live in Green Bay, Wisconsin, but your mean, or average, temperature in July and August is a relatively balmy 70 degrees Fahrenheit. In contrast, gardeners in San Francisco have at least 307 growing days. In fact, they only have a killing frost 1 year out of 10, but in July and August the mean temperature is about 60 degrees. Many herbs grow slowly or cease growth altogether in temperatures lower than 50 degrees. Plants that require heat to fully mature, such as chili peppers, may have plenty of time to turn red in San Francisco, but they may not have enough heat. Likewise, at very high temperatures many herbs slow or cease growth and go into survival mode. Rather than risk losing too much moisture, they close their pores and shut down photosynthesis. For example, in the Deep South, basil will die out in summer from the heat. Most plants prefer moderate conditions, not too hot, not too cold. To help gardeners factor heat into their gardening equation, the American Horticultural Society developed the heat zone map. The 12 zones of the map indicate the average number of days each year that the thermometer hits 86 degrees Fahrenheit, 30 degrees Celsius. A day during which the temperature rises above that level is called a heat day. Zone 1 averages less than 1 heat day per year, and Zone 12 averages more than 210 heat days. You won't find heat zone ratings on plant tags, but if you live in a region with scorching summers, you may see or hear references to the map. You can find out more about heat zone ratings and view the map at the following website: www.ars.org/publications/heat_zone_map.htm. In the southeast, heat partners up with humidity, creating ideal conditions for many plant diseases to strike. If you live in an area where every day is a scorcher, check with local gardeners about herbs that do, and don't, grow well for them. Don't despair if you feel that all this information seems to be getting way too complicated. Keep in mind that most people live in a temperate climate, a climate that has distinct seasons and average temperatures above 60 degrees Fahrenheit in summer and gets at least 30 inches of precipitation each year. That means that in summer, they can grow most herbs outdoors, in their gardens and on their decks, patios, or rooftops. Native versus exotic plants. The study of what naturally grows in any given region is called plant geography. North America's plant geography is amazingly diverse. Scientists have identified more than a dozen different floristic, from flora, or plant, regions. You can find everything from the Arctic tundra of Alaska and northern Canada, with its grasses, lichens, and sedges, to the hot, arid deserts of the Southwest and the steamy, tropical conditions of southern Florida and Hawaii. Plants in gardens that shudder at the very thought of frost. Natives or indigenous plants are those that grew in North America before people from other parts of the world arrived on the continent. In contrast, exotic species, also called exotics, non-natives, and introduced plants, are floral immigrants, species brought to a location from other continents or regions. Which plants are here on green cards may surprise you. Dandelions are as common as flies at a picnic, but the dandelion isn't a native plant. It came to New England with the first settlers, who used its leaves in a stew pot and its roots to treat liver diseases. Like the colonists, it liked it here and made itself at home, or naturalized. Chicory, another familiar roadside flower, is also an exotic. Some exotics have become invasive, which means they've made themselves too much at home. They're crowding out important and desirable native plants, changing the natural ecological balance on which other living things depend, and making general pests of themselves. For more on invasives, see Chapter 2. However, most exotics are welcome guests, and among them are some of our most popular herbs. See the sidebar. Your address, please. Finding out where herbs come from is fun for its own sake, but the geographical origin of an herb also tells much about the garden conditions that will best suit its cultural needs, what a plant needs to succeed in cultivation, such as highly acid soil or great amounts of water. Herbs from hot, arid regions are used to sandy soil and prepared for drought. Planting them in heavy soil and watering them frequently is a prescription for disaster. Don't worry too much if the herbs you want to grow come from the Himalayas and you live on the prairie, or if they come from the tropics of Africa and you're gardening in northern Idaho. Herbs don't have to be natives to do well in your garden, they just have to be able to cope with the conditions in your garden. The good news is that most herbs are remarkably flexible. They survive, even thrive, in conditions as broad as the proverbial barn door. Giving herbs what they want in a perfect world, we would all have Garden of Eden conditions. Put another way, each of us would have a sunny, sheltered, well-drained, southwest-facing plot with organically rich loam and plenty of rainfall, ideal conditions for many popular herbs. But even if you don't have ideal conditions, and few gardeners do, you can make the most of your yard by getting to know its microclimates, places that are warmer, cooler, or otherwise different from the prevailing conditions elsewhere in your yard. Making the most of microclimates as you look at your site, begin with a big picture. Are you located in the bottom of a small valley, which often means cold nighttime temperatures as cool air drains down the hillsides? Or are you located on a north-facing slope, where your plants will receive less direct sun? Then look more closely. Does the wind come roaring through one part of your property? Is there an area that stays wet for 3 days after it rains? As you're assessing your site, remember that different herbs have different requirements and there's an herb for nearly any garden locale. Here are some of the variables, starting with light. Letting the sun shine in. Light is the most critical consideration when locating any garden. It's the one element that you, the gardener, can't supply. Most herbs are devoted sunbathers. To them, sun is as essential as fast food is to a teenager. At a minimum, and it really is a minimum, herbs need 6 hours of full sun daily. Full sun is unobstructed sunlight. 8 hours of full sun are better than 6. Herbs labeled full sun do best if they have an entire day of unobstructed sunlight. Not only do sun-starved gardens warm slowly in the spring and cool quickly in the fall, but their residents tend to be spindly, weak, and susceptible to diseases. In most regions, the best location for herbs is a southern exposure. In hot areas, you may need to site your garden so that it receives some protection from the afternoon sun. If the choice is between morning and afternoon sun, choose morning sun, which will warm things up early in the day yet give plants relief during the hot afternoon hours. If you're reading this in the middle of winter and looking out on a sunny area, don't forget that come springtime deciduous trees will leaf out and cast shadows. Of course, evergreens, shrubs, and tall plants, as well as fences, buildings, and other vertical structures, offer shade year-round. Midsummer is the best time to measure what's shading what. Trees are in full leaf and the sun in the northern hemisphere is high in the sky. See Figure 32. Finally, if you're planting in rows, run them from east to west, and plant tall herbs or vines on the north side of the garden. Both these techniques help plants get the best possible sun exposure and keep taller plants from shading their smaller neighbors. When the Wind Blows, Thomas Hill, who wrote The Gardener's Labyrinth, the first English language how-to-garden book in 1577, was quick to point out that both gardens and their gardeners need fresh air. Evil air doth not only annoy and corrupt the plants, but choke and dull the spirits of men. To keep your herbs, and yourself, from being annoyed, corrupted, choked, or dulled, keep your garden away from low spots, where air can pool. See Figure 33. Cold air is heavier than warm air, that's why low areas are susceptible to frost. Pick a mountain town with hollow in its name, and you've probably picked a place that holds some kind of record for a late spring frost. Poor air circulation also provides the stagnant conditions that encourage plant diseases, especially in humid climates. Do everything you can to ensure good air circulation. If you must fence your garden to ward off wildlife, don't make it a solid wall that will keep your herbs from getting the fresh air they need. On the other hand, if your property is near the ocean, or regularly in the path of prevailing winds, your herbs may need protection. Any garden site that regularly gets winds in the 15 miles per hour range needs a windbreak, or wind barrier. Anything that obstructs wind does more than keep your herbs from being tattered and torn, or toppling over. It also safeguards the soil from erosion and helps keep it from drying out. If it's cold, wind can annihilate a row of young basil plants in a matter of hours, or, if you're lucky, just slow their growth for weeks to come. In contrast, hot winds desiccate, or dehydrate, plants, and that, too, can be lethal. If the wind that draws through your garden is constant, you'll probably want a permanent windbreak, such as trees, shrubs, vines, fences, and walls. Temporary barriers contain winds that come and go, mostly in early spring, for example. You can choose from dozens of possibilities, including floating row covers, secured wire cages wrapped with plastic, clutches, and more. Before you erect a permanent barrier, make absolutely sure you know the direction of the prevailing winds. Put your windbreak on the wrong side and you could have cold winds pooling on your angelica and rosemary. By the way, you don't have to build the Great Wall of China. Semi-open structures do a better job than solid ones, plus they don't blow over in gales. Living windbreaks are one of the most attractive solutions, but they're also like kids' appetites, they get bigger and bigger. Plant them, especially trees, at a distance, from your garden, of 4 times their mature height. Water everywhere. You only have to watch the news to know that some regions get a lot more rain than others. If it doesn't rain at your house during the growing season, you'll have to water. It's as simple as that. For instructions on when and how, skip to chapter 9. But if it does rain, especially if it rains often and long, make sure you don't pick the wettest spot on your property to grow herbs. Does a river run through it? Is the turf spongy? These are dead giveaways, Mother Nature's way of saying, not a good place for herbs. Waterlogged ground is air poor, and your herbs' roots need air as well as moisture. A large number of common herbs not only don't like wet ground, they prefer moderately arid conditions. You can do one of 2 tests to measure your soil's porosity, how fast or slow it drains. If you suspect your soil drains poorly, dig a hole 1 foot deep and 1 foot square, and fill it with water. Refill it 24 hours later, and then keep track of how quickly the water drains. If the hole doesn't empty in 12 hours, drainage is poor. If you suspect your soil drains too rapidly, water your garden area thoroughly, at least to a depth of 6 inches. After 48 hours, check the soil. If the top 6 inches are dry, your soil dries faster than it should to support most plants. You can do a number of things to your soil to make it drain better or retain water better. Those details are in Chapter 7. Raised beds, which you find out about in Chapter 5, are one solution for moderately wet spots. But if the ground is excessively wet, it may require draining. Think backhoe, drainage tiles, French drains, dry wells, and money. Then consider putting the garden somewhere else. Location, location, location. Creating a garden is hard work. It takes time and energy. But a garden is made in soil, not stone. If in 3 years, or even 1 year, you decide that your first location was a mistake, you're allowed a do-over. Even so, it makes sense to carefully consider the placement of your herb garden. Take into account how you treat and use the plants you'll be growing. For example, if you use pesticides on your rose bushes, keep herbs away from them unless you're growing the herbs purely for their ornamental value. Better yet, find out how to manage pests without resorting to sprays. Flip to Chapter 10 for non-toxic ways to control pests. Here are a few thoughts about where to locate your garden: near, but off, the beaten path. You want family and friends to walk near your herbs but not on them. Close to a water supply. Being near a faucet will keep you from having to buy a 1,000 foot hose. Away from the street and other sources of possible contamination. Contaminated soil is commonplace alongside roads and driveways and surrounding old buildings, so avoid gardening in these locations if you can. If you must use a problematic site, have your soil tested for its lead content. Lead contamination comes from leaching paint and paint chips, and from years of auto exhausts when lead-based gasoline was the norm. Your county health department can point you to a lab in your area that can test for different contaminants. Remember, you'll be eating, smelling, or otherwise getting up close and personal with your herbs. Close to your tools and supplies. If you want to work on your biceps, however, place your garden far away from the tool shed. In clear view. We get pleasure in just looking at our gardens. You will, too. Chapter 4: Designing your herb garden. In this chapter, discovering your garden style, looking at garden designs through the ages, handling hardscapes, the hard stuff, making your design eye-pleasing. When people think of an herb garden, they often imagine a formal garden laid out in a knot shape or another precise geometric pattern, but this is just one way to grow herbs. You can also grow herbs in informal beds or mix them in among ornamentals and vegetables. After all, many herb plants are beautiful in their own right, and many are edible, too. Ideally, you'll have a design in mind before you buy or sow your first herb plant. But if you're like most gardeners, herbs are at least occasionally an impulse buy. You see a plant you like and buy it. But when you get it home, you wonder where to plant it. Although it pays to have a general design in mind, flexibility is also important, that is, unless you're that 1 in a million gardener who can actually walk past an herb display without buying at least one plant. In this chapter, you discover the basics of designing an herb garden. Once you have the fundamentals down, you'll be ready to create your own herbal nirvana. Or, you can flip to Chapter 5 for specific herb garden plans. And because most herbs are ideal for containers, too, Chapter 6 is devoted to that subject. Getting started. As you consider how and where to grow your herbs, keep in mind that the definition of herbs assumes that you want to use them in a practical way. So before you make the trip to the nursery or dig your first hole, ask yourself a few questions. Why am I growing herbs? Primarily for their beauty? Or for use in the kitchen, or to make tinctures or salves? How often will I harvest? Will I snip a few sprigs every day, or do one big harvest each year? Do I want a separate herb garden? Or would it make more sense to incorporate herbs into existing vegetable and ornamental gardens? Catering to convenience. If you'll be harvesting oregano, dill, and rosemary daily to seasoned meals, you'll want the plants just seconds away from your chopping block. Consider mixing herbs into the ornamental beds around your house. Most are attractive as well as tasty. Or, if you have the room and enough sunlight, make a small kitchen garden just outside the door, and fill it with culinary herbs, along with a few tomato and pepper plants and maybe some lettuce. At the very least, you can plant a large container of your favorite herbs outside the kitchen door. You'll be that much closer to having dinner ready in a jiffy. Deliberating one-shot deals. Are you planning to make tinctures for a good night's sleep, Dry lots of herbs to cook with in winter, or create arrangements and wreaths of dried herbs. In that case, you might harvest the entire herb crop once a year. If so, proximity to your kitchen is less important. Instead of starting a new herb garden, consider expanding your vegetable garden and growing your chamomile, rosemary, or yarrow the way you grow your other crops, in easy-to-maintain rows. Creating an herbal oasis. Are you looking for an herbal retreat? Maybe all this talk of crops and harvests smacks too much of menial labor. Instead of being like Maya toiling in the fields, grapes of wrath style, you picture yourself as Greta Garbo pining, "I want to be alone." If so, your garden needs to be a place where you can escape workaday cares and revel in the pure pleasure of herbs' textures, scents, and colors. Put your herbs in a secluded spot and, if necessary, create a sense of privacy with a screen of conifers or vine-clad trellises. And don't forget to include a comfy chair or hammock. An herbal nod to history. The first step in designing a garden is to consider the overall feel you're trying to achieve. Do you like symmetry and order? Or is a freeform look more your style? History is filled with gardens at both extremes. Of course, you may want to go for something in between. Formal designs, tucks optional. You may have formed your impressions of herb garden design through woodcuts of medieval monasteries. These images usually show large, walled gardens with raised, rectangular beds. Everything growing in them had a use, even the flowers weren't frivolous, they were used to decorate the altar. Meanwhile, outside the monastery walls, wealthy Europeans were creating knot gardens, probably the most impractical garden design ever devised. Intended to be admired from upper stories, knot gardens required boxwood or various herbs to be planted in squares, circles, triangles, fleur-de-lis, and loop-de-loops, and then meticulously pruned so they seemed to be growing over and under each other. Those swirls could contain the equivalent of a healthy, 20-foot row of rosemary, but a gardener couldn't gather much more than a leaf or two from such an arrangement without spoiling its appearance. The tradition of geometric designs for kitchen gardens came to American shores in the 1600s, and was eventually translated in Pennsylvania by no-nonsense German settlers. Theirs was the so-called four-square garden, 4 perfectly square blocks separated by 2-foot walkways. These gardeners eventually modified the look with more beds and rectangles, but still with an area hint of a curved line. Formal design is first and foremost geometric, with straight paths and symmetrical plant placements. Some plants are more formal than others as well, forming tidy mounds with not a leaf out of place, and these are obvious choices for a traditional herb garden. Statuary and heavy urns containing topiary also look at home in a formal garden, usually set at the center as a focal point. Informal designs. The laid-back look. Ironically, the stiff upper-lipped English gave us the relaxed cottage garden in which plants grown for household use were mingled in a seemingly haphazard fashion, usually in a small front yard. Favorite herbs included flowery calendula, chive, monarda, bee balm, artemisia, and damask roses alongside fragrant lilacs, Leophthevely, mock orange, and dame's rocket. But in fact, the layout underlying these cottage gardens was often as geometric as those of the monasteries. What made these gardens seem informal was the lavishness with which plants were crammed together, often climbing up the side of the dwelling and around the door, and flopping onto the walkway so that hard surfaces seemed softer. Today, the trend in American gardens is toward a more natural look in garden design. Beds and paths are shaped with flowing curves, emulating those you see in a woodland, meadow, or on a hillside. Garden ornaments, too, may look as though they were left casually behind, wooden wheelbarrows, antique tools, or perhaps a thatched birdhouse. Incorporating design basics. Beginning gardeners invariably think first about flower color, and the more boisterous the better. Some never tire of the unrelenting yellow of marigolds or the magenta of petunias. But usually, like a Lothario ready to settle down, a seasoned gardener begins to look beyond superficial flashiness to more lasting qualities, foliage color and texture, the shape of the entire plant, and fragrance. In all of these attributes, herbs are champions. Before you go on to plant selection, though, you need to understand some of the hard stuff. Garden bones. Hardscapes. Winter is the best time to see the structure of your landscape, or what the experts call its bones. What does your garden look like after annual herbs have given up the ghost and all but the evergreen perennial herbs are dormant below ground? In a well-designed landscape, your eye should discern rhythmic lines in your paths and the edges of your beds. You should see some strong vertical lines, tree trunks or an arbor, perhaps with the bonus of a snow-shrouded garden ornament such as a statue. Landscape designers use the word hardscape to refer to the permanent, non-living parts of your garden. These include natural elements, such as boulders, as well as everything made of rock, concrete, wood, or plastic. Paths. Every landscape needs paths, both for visual reasons, to create a sense of movement and boundaries, and for practical reasons, to get you from one area to another without tramping through the growing beds. Formal herb garden designs often have intersecting paths with an ornament placed in the center, which also serves as a focal point to draw the eye in. You can widen the path to create a terrace, giving you room to kneel or stoop when you want to harvest a sprig of mint for tea, cilantro for salsa, or sweet anise for a dry bouquet. Widen the path a bit more and you have a spot for a bench where you can kick back and relax. In a formal herb garden, the paths are generally straight, except when surrounding a circular knot garden. In a cottage-style or mixed garden, you have the freedom to include sinuous curves, perhaps winding under an arched trellis of passionflower, Passiflora spp. Or hops, Humulus lupulus. You can create a path with turf, gravel or other small stones, bark mulch, or flagstones. Think about adding in some low-growing herbs between stepping stones. Traditionally, the material of choice for paths in herb gardens is aged brick, which speaks to the plant's history. Permanent and solid. The texture of brick is a perfect foil for feathery leaves, and the mellow color of brick, varying from red through yellow, is a lovely counterpoint to the many shades of green you find in herbs. Edging. You can edge your herb bed with one of the shrubby or low-growing herbs popular for that purpose. Read more about them in the section Developing Good Habits, later in this chapter, but most gardeners find it easier to employ non-living materials, landscape timber, stone, or the aged brick used for the paths. Even informal gardens benefit from having some type of border to define the beds and keep the lawn from infiltrating them. Structures. Arbors, pergolas, and trellises provide focal points and add interest to gardens year-round. The same goes for walls and fences. Patios, decks, and terraces, any flat spot with a few pieces of comfortable outdoor furniture, invite visitors to relax and should be included in a garden design. Color considerations. When it comes to their flowers, the best known culinary and medicinal herbs are shrinking violets. Basil and mint have relatively insignificant flower spikes that, while capable of driving bees into passionate frenzies, should be removed if you want to keep the fresh flavor of the herb and avoid lessening its health-giving components. Many herbs have blue, purple, or pink flowers, so if you're partial to this cool combination you can reap great satisfaction by combining thyme, chives, oregano, rosemary, and sage, perhaps with a border of lavender. Bee balm, or monarda, offers you a choice of intense, deep pink Marshall's Delight, and red Cambridge Scarlet. You can add yellow to the palette with a campan, evening primrose, Anotherobyanus, goldenrod, Solidago spp. And tansy. Calendula takes you from yellow into sunny oranges. You can create a more lasting tapestry of color, however, by collecting herbs with an eye to their foliage. Gray, white, and silver. Herbs are famous for pale foliage that helps tone down or blend bright colors that might otherwise clash. Choose from catmint, Nepeta spp. Curry plant, Helichrysum italicum, lamb's ear, Stachys byzantina, virtually any lavender, sage, lavender cotton Santolinich Umma Parisus, or woolly thyme, Thymus pseudoneugenosis. Among the artemisias, in addition to southernwood and wormwood, Look for Artemisia albicanescensis. Or how about one of the Gracchus cultivars, such as Miss Sinkins's? Purple and red. You can bring deep burgundy red into the garden by planting Perilla, purple sage purpura, or the basil cultivars Reuben and Osman. Orange mint gets its name from its smell, but its leaves have a subtle purple color. Yellow. Just look for some form of aurum, the Latin word for gold, in a species or cultivar name. Some of these plants range from yellow to chartreuse. You can buy golden varieties of few, pot marjoram erignamonites, oregano, hops, sage, thyme, and valerian. Blue color is often in the eye of the beholder, but to most, rue has the bluest foliage among herbs, especially the cultivar plant called Jackman's blue. Refer to Chapter 2 for cautions about growing rue. The foliage of some varieties of rosemary tends toward blue-green, and is a safer bet. Bronze fennel is in a color class by itself with its distinctive, shimmery, reddish-brown foliage. Variegation. You don't want to overdo variegated leaves, those that are tinged with white, yellow, pink, or some combination, if you don't want your garden looking like a three-ring circus. But a few variegated plants scattered here and there provide a lively counterpoint to solid green, and can brighten up a dark corner. Tricolor sage, which has swirls of pink and white on the usual green, and variegated thymes are among the most popular variegated herbs. You'll also find subtle colors among the scented geraniums. Look for fair Ellen, chocolate mint, and skies of Italy. Fuzzy, frilly, shiny, lacy. As you grow and study herbs, you'll notice that the texture of their leaves is even more varied than their color. Deciding which plants contrast most strikingly when planted next to each other is one of the endless pleasures of herb gardening. For soft fuzziness, nature hasn't come up with anything that begs to be petted more than lamb's ear, an ornamental perennial. Its herbal cousin, betony, has greener but still hairy leaves, and contains tannins that can soothe a sore throat or treat diarrhea. A scented geranium collection is a menagerie of tactile thrills, velvety, sandpapery, and crinkly. Here are some of the herbal textures you can play with in your garden. Fern-like herbs with leaves that are divided or toothed like fern leaves include chamomile, cheville, few, parsley, and tansy. The leaves of valerian are deeply divided, too, but the effect is quite different on this 5-foot plant. Feathery, dill, fennel, southernwood, wormwood, and yarrow are among the herbs with leaves so finely divided as to approach hair-like. Anise has fine leaves at the top of the plant, while those near its base are more like parsley. Smooth and shiny, the smooth leaves of bay and eucalyptus reflect light and brighten a garden. Tiny. When you visit a well-stocked herb nursery, you may think the thyme breeders are having a contest to see who can produce the tiniest leaves. Ground huggers such as Minus's thyme have the smallest pinpoints that would do pointillist painter Georges Seurat proud. Prickly, what's the point? Spiny leaves give your domain a bit of drama. Tricardoon, Cynara cardunculus, or its cousin globe artichoke, Cynarus calamus, live rejuvenating milk thistle, or a thicket of the prickle surfeited eglantine rose, Rosa eglantina. Of course, keep these away from paths, unless you want to deter visitors. Running your finger across a sunflower leaf will send shivers down your spine, but for true grit, grow sage. Rub a leaf over your teeth to clean them after dinner, it's good for your gums, too. Succulent, these plants have their own botanical category because of the way their thick, fleshy leaves store water. Aloe is the most common herb among them. Purslane, Portulaca oleracea, a nutritious weed that's rich in anti-aging antioxidants, looks a bit like a jade plant that has been stomped on. Pleated, the leaves of lady's mantle, Alchemilla mollis, and nasturtium are round and puckery, while those of silver sage, Salvia argentaria, add white fuzz to the garden mix. Developing good habits. You may not be able to distinguish the sandpapery look of sage leaves or the satiny sheen of basil from a distance. But in a well-designed garden, your eye will be drawn to the overall effect of the different shapes and sizes of the plants. Informal gardens combine plants with a wide variety of shapes and sizes. Formal gardens rely on a more symmetrical arrangement and sometimes incorporate plants that have been carefully pruned to specific shapes. Even in informal gardens, repeating a shape gives rhythm to the design. The shape and growth pattern of a plant is called its habit. Basil and sage have shrubby habits. Their branching stems form more or less rounded mounds. Creeping thyme crawls flat along the ground like a living carpet. Some plants have a strongly vertical habit. Mullein, with its tall flower stalks reaching skyward, is a good example. Still others are climbers, such as passion flower and hops. The following list of plant habits, along with examples of herbs that fit the bill, gives you an idea of the range of shapes you have to work with when you're planning your garden. Tall spires: Angelica, Angelica archangelica, black cohosh, Acti, Erasmosa, evening primrose, Joe pieweed, Eupatorium purpureum, mullein, and other vertical herbs have an air of stateliness and drama. These plants command attention, so use them sparingly. Mullein also has a basal rosette, a circle of foliage near the stem, of big felty leaves, so you'll get a habit and texture bonus. Big and bushy, Lovage, marshmallow, meadowsweet, Philopendula ulmaria, and Jerusalem artichoke, Helianthus tuberosus, look more like the Capitol building than the Washington Monument. Tall, yes, but they also gobble up lots of ground. Grasslug, the fan-like foliage of orris root, Iris florentina, like that of all irises, is handsome long after the flowers are gone. For a similar grass-like shape, lusty lemongrass, Cymbopogon citratus, and chipper chives are the long and short of it, respectively. Monster leaves, Grocardoon, which reaches a height of 6 to 8 feet, for pure mass. Planted where you won't inadvertently brush up against the spines of this thistle relative. Or surround your house with a living fence of closely spaced cardoon plants and ditch your home security system. Mound. Some herbs form such perfect mounds that you want to reach down and pet them like a sleeping cat. These make good edging plants, or you can use them for contrast with floppy or spiky plants. Good mounders include chamomile, feefew, many types of lavender, and some of the Artemisia clans such as Silver Mound and Powys Castle. Ground covers, creepy crawly herbs, such as sweet woodruff, cover ground and suppress weeds between other plants. An herb gardener's trick is to tuck chamomile and the low-growing thymes between stepping stones, where they release their fragrance when you step on or brush against them. Hanging herbs with limp stems look lush dangling from a hanging basket or draped across the side of a raised bed or window box. A few good candidates are borage, catmint, lemon balm, prostrate rosemary, thyme, nasturtium, oregano, especially dittany of Crete, Orignum dictamnus, and some scented geraniums. Vines use climbing herbs such as hops, honeysuckle, Lonicera spp. Carolina jasmine, Gelsemium sempervirens, climbing nasturtium, or passion flower on a trellis for privacy or to give other herbs a windbreak. In a border, a planting area that backs to a wall or fence. Put tall plants toward the back. In a bed, a planting area exposed on all sides, set tall plants in the center. Floppy plants work best along the edges, while ground covers will blanket bare earth between other herbs. Make sure that taller neighbors don't steal all their sun. Aroma wasn't built in a day. Look up the word fragrance in a thesaurus, and what do you see? A list of herbs, from allspice to vanilla. In fact, fragrance so characterizes herbs that coming up with a list of herbs that don't smell wonderful might be the easiest way to deal with this category. Nonetheless, we plunge daringly ahead, suggesting a few of our favorites. Crush a few leaves of the following plants and see whether you agree. Scented geraniums. These olfactory superstars deserve billing above the title, as they say in the marquee biz. You can choose from scents such as rose, apricot, almond, mint, cinnamon, nutmeg, chocolate mint, coconut, eucalyptus, lemon, orange, camphor, pine, strawberry, and apple. Mints. If geraniums get the gold medal, mint and thyme tie for silver. There are mints that smell of apple laced with menthol, or lime, chocolate, think York peppermint patties, banana, ginger, grapefruit, orange, and more. Thymes, go straight for lemon thyme, which actually does smell like citrus. Then try orange, caraway, lavender, mint, and nutmeg. You can even find thyme that smells like oregano. Lavenders, the discerning nose will find some varieties sweeter and others more medicinal. English lavender, Lavandula angustifolia, has the clean scent of lace handkerchiefs, while French, also known as Spanish, lavender, L. stitches, smells more like something used for treating sports injuries and battling bugs. Catmint, said not to attract cats the way catnip does, catmint also has a stronger and more appealing scent for the human nose. Some compare it to mint jelly. We think it has undertones of pine or cedar. Curry, it's a marvel how nature stuffed the aroma of curry, an East Indian concoction made up of as many as 20 different herbs and spices, into a single plant. Ironically, curry is not a culinary herb, but the silvery 12 to 18-inch plants make a great edging, and you can pluck the leaves for potpourri. Chapter 5 Herb Garden Plans. In this chapter, enticing bees, birds, and butterflies, giving a nod to history, accommodating culinary pursuits, creating specialty gardens. We think the designs in this chapter are pretty magnificent, and we had fun with them in our own gardens. But feel free to do with them as you please. Make the designs bigger or smaller, rounder or squarer. Mix M or match M. Put medicinal herbs in the Shakespeare beds or bee herbs in the culinary stair steps. We're here to encourage and inspire, not to make home visits to see whether you stayed between the lines. Raising M right, a beginner's garden. Our first few herb gardens were variations on the design shown in Figure 51. You can give yours a new cast of characters every year. The sage will get too big, transplant it and use the space for more parsley. If the dianthus rebels against your hot summers, trade it out for a licorice plant. Figure 51 shows a raised bed made by raking soil into a mound. If you're more ambitious, build a raised bed with a naturally rot-resistant wood, such as cedar, and top one edge with a wide board so that you can sit and admire your lavender. You can keep plants neatly trimmed or let them spill over the edges. Located just outside the kitchen door, this garden gives you quick access to ingredients when tarragon chicken is on the menu. Flying high, a garden for bees and butterflies. If you enjoy watching butterflies float and bees industriously gather pollen, consider planting a garden of their favorite herbs. Check out Figure 52. Backyard pollinator gardens are especially in vogue because of the sharp decline in the populations of many pollinating insects over the last few years. By planting herbs that attract honeybees, along with the many native bee species, you'll ensure their presence when the squash and pumpkin flowers need pollinating. Because most people enjoy butterflies even more than bees, their seemingly effortless gliding and floating make a nice counterpoint to the frenzied vibrations of the honey producers. We've created a garden that also includes a few of their favorite plants, as well as plants that supply food for their larvae. As with second marriages, attracting butterflies is a case of love me, love my children. Keep in mind that caterpillars are butterfly and moth larvae, so use pesticides judiciously, or you may kill the very butterflies you're trying to attract. Get a good insect field guide to help you distinguish friend from foe. Our butterfly site is an old well that needed gussying up to keep it from looking like a wart on the landscape. This central feature could just as well, forgive the pun, be an old tree stump or a rock too big to move. The garden butts up against the edge of a deck, so viewers can look down on it. We also added a trio of skeps, straw or wicker beehives that are available in various sizes at nurseries and garden centers. If you have only a tree stump or small rock, one skep will do nicely. Prolong the life of a skep by bringing it indoors for the winter and during prolonged periods of rain. The butterfly shape may be way too cute for a lot of gardeners. But if children are frequent visitors to the garden, cute is in order. At the butterfly's nether end, we've included a little puddle pub. Some male butterflies congregate in mud puddles, because during mating season they need the sodium and other minerals that leach from the soil. Here, poorly draining soil, otherwise cursed by gardeners, is ideal. You'll need to make mud with the garden hose on days that it doesn't rain. To one side of this area, set out a shallow dish of water for the butterflies that don't patronize mud baths, such as hackberries, commas, and question marks. Yes, these are butterflies, but don't expect to attract any semicolons. Although you should normally harvest herbs on a sunny day, you may want to break that rule if you create a bee garden or if you find that your herbs attract unruly throngs of them. Collect herbs in the cool of the morning or on an overcast day, when the bees will be more laid back. Will's Way, a Shakespearean conceit. Pity isn't the only definition of the word conceit. It can also mean an elaborate metaphor, an extended comparison like those that gave Shakespeare so much pleasure, or it can mean a fanciful idea, the likes of which herb gardeners are quite fond. We're kind of uppity about our Shakespearean garden design, shown in Figure 53, created for those who might picture themselves strolling along their garden path with an old college chum, quoting lines from Ophelia's death scene, or perusing sonnets at dusk. Shakespeare's plays and poems are full of more plants than anyone could cram into a single garden, so the list of substitutions is limited only to the time you have to spend hunkered down with his greatest works. To make this a soothing place to read or meditate, all the plant's flowers are in restful shades of blue and pink, and the design is formal, which is less distracting than the random patterns of an informal garden. Bay and rosemary are both handsome, aromatic plants, but they aren't cold hardy in most of the country. Thus, we imagine them planted in ornate containers, set in the four corners, so that they can easily be brought inside to overwinter. If you see a Shakespearean area in a botanic garden or grand private landscape, it will often have a bust of Will as a focal point. But ours is a cozy retreat, not a library, and let's face it, the man is extremely dead. To bring life and music to this haven, how about a place for avian friends to splash? To stick to the theme, you can dub it your bird bath. Something's cooking, a culinary garden if you love to cook. Grow your herbs where you can harvest a handful easily in all kinds of weather. We've designed our culinary herb garden, shown in Figure 54, for a house with steps that descend from the kitchen door toward the west, giving most of the garden a warm, sunny exposure. This hot site, combined with the overhang from the house, may mean watering more often. The overhang will block much of your rain. To either side of the stairs, we've built stair-step raised beds for this cook's most frequently used herbs. Like automobile mileage, yours may differ. The raised bed to the right of the stairs gets a bit less sun, so here's where we've planted the more shaded tiller and mince, parsley, and chivill. The garden ornament that inspired the U-shaped bed was an old metal washtub on which we mounted a whirligig of a washerwoman. In some parts of the country, whirligigs get about as much respect as pink flamingos. Check your own neighborhood tastemakers for prevailing attitudes, then feel free to ignore them. We've used the tub as a place to sink a pot of rosemary, which can be lifted out and brought inside during the winter in cold winter areas. Because the tub is so large, we had room to tuck other herbs around the edges, and we chose nasturtiums to add bright colors to the garden. Patio pleasures, a garden for the senses. Herbs are some of the most sensuous plants ever created, but gardeners don't always situate them where all their qualities can be savored. Most of them don't release their delectable fragrances into the air by themselves, as lilacs or rugosa roses do. Instead, they must be crushed or at least brushed against, so we urge you to plant them where you can stroke them or even dance on them. The area to the north of the patio shown in Figure 55 is shady and damp, providing ideal conditions to grow tall valerian and sweet woodruff as a ground cover. Fragrant, feathery foliaged fennel, say that fast 20 times, and the fragrant double soapwort cultivar Sapinaria officinalis rosiplena are containerized. Both species are invasive and a friendly climate. Next to our chaise we have a wrought iron shelf for herbs that we like to caress. Scented geraniums are a great choice. So are rosemary, thyme, lemon balm, and lavender. We've also designed this patio to give you some privacy, with a trellis to the north and an evergreen shrub to the south, so neighbors can't catch you as you wallow around in the thyme or rub leaves of lamb's ear over your face. Tied up in knots, a garden for teas and medicines. If you look at drawings of old knot gardens, you can see that they weren't intended for growing herbs for harvest so much as for showing off the wealth or leisure time of their owners. Often, the areas between the knots were filled not with plants but with pebbles or turf, or earth that was colored with crushed minerals. A closed knot had no paths between blocks to allow access for picking the herbs. But even if you have both space and time to spare, you may want to put it to a more productive purpose than impressing the neighbors with your pruning skills. So in the interest of efficiency, we've designed an intensively planted but relatively simple knot design, shown in Figure 56, that gives you an ample variety of herbs useful for medicine and tea. The traditional knot in the center, based on an equilateral triangle, is a trichtra, also known as a shamrock design. By surrounding it with an outer edging, we've provided divisions for 6 additional herbs. See the sidebar tying a trichtra knot for how to info. Consider how much of each herb you'll be cutting before you plant, because some sections are bigger than others. And if you harvest too much of a knot, you'll untie it. Although knot garden plants are usually low-growing, we broke the rules by allowing taller plants, such as anise and fennel, in the center. Because this area is the hardest to reach, you may want to use the space for an herb that you won't be consuming. You may not harvest your own echinacea root, for instance, since echinacea capsules for cold prevention are so readily available. Or, you can follow another tradition and set an ornament, such as a sundial, in the center. Keep the whole design to 5 feet across or less if you want to have any hope of reaching plants near the center without treading on the bed. Because you want your herbs to knit together quickly, plant them, and wells in particular, close together. You can make your plants appear to grow under and over each other by pruning one plant on the underside of its growth and pulling the long top growth over the adjacent plant, exactly like a balding man combing what hair he has left over a bald spot. The next list contains good candidates for tying a knot. If, like most of us, you find knots too quaint and time-consuming, use several of these plants along the edge of a less contrived herb bed to add punch to the picture you've painted. Boxwood, Buxus sempervirens suffruticasa, Vardar Valley, Newport Blue, Bush Basil, Ocimum minimum Purple Bush, Green Globe, Green Bouquet, Dwarf Common Sage, Salvia officinalis minimuses, English Lavender, Lavandula angustifolia Hidcote, Jean Davis's, Lady, Munst. Hyssop, Hyssopus officinalis Pink Sprite. Santolina, Santolina chumra Esciparisis nana. Southernwood, Artemisia abrotinum, Winter Savory, Saturia montana, Fine Friends. A mixed garden mixing herbs with vegetables or flowers isn't a radical technique. English cottage gardeners were doing it centuries ago. Today, the most upscale lifestyle magazines show tidy country gardens filled with edibles and cutting flowers, surrounded by gravel paths and protected from predators by fences that mix the rustic saplings with the bark still attached, and the necessary chicken wire to keep out predators. The garden in Figure 57 combines the stylish, the practical, and the historical. You can choose your own style of fencing, from highbrow English wattle to common, yet practical, chain link. White picket is never pass. The 4 beds are a rectangular version of the traditional German 4-square garden. The ground around them should be easy to care for, perhaps just a mower's width of lawn. A thick layer of mulch or gravel is better still. Minimal maintenance. Raised beds edged with boards or landscape timbers make the garden easier to weed and harvest. More important, raised beds provide better drainage. In arranging these plants, we kept these 2 important considerations in mind. Choose boon companions. We suggest placing the plants based on companion planting, which holds that some plants fare better or worse depending on their neighbors, a concept we all can relate to. The scientific jury is still out on a lot of these relationships, but we do know that diversity, growing a variety of plants rather than a monoculture, a single species, is healthier, whether you're trying to grow food crops or restore a rainforest. Basil, which may repel tomato hornworms, has long been paired with tomatoes, and fragrant yarrow may scare away insects that plague the squash family, such as pumpkins, zucchini, and cucumbers. Sourdoughnwood supposedly strikes terror into flea beetles, a scourge of eggplant. Let a swag be the umbrella. You can also use plants to create microclimates for others. See Chapter 3 for more about microclimates. Some companion plants may work their magic simply because they shade the roots of their chums. You can create even more shade with tall plants, such as the tansy and berries we planted on the west side, or a tall swag of pole beans or other climbers, which we put on the south side of the garden. A swag is a rope that hangs in a curve between two poles. You may be familiar with the term as it relates to window drapes. In gardens, you can make a swag with a vine, such as English ivy. In Figure 57, we've hung a length of trellis netting between two bin teepees for pole beans to climb. A row of giant sunflowers is another popular and cheery approach to create shade in the garden. Themes and variations. An herb garden is its own theme, but you can specialize by choosing only herbs from the Bible, herbs used by Native Americans, herbs for teas, or herbs for dyes. Children love to grow pizza and salsa gardens, filled with vegetables and herbs necessary for these favorite foods. Or you can tuck herbs into other specialized gardens, such as rock gardens or even water gardens. Rock gardens. Many of our most popular culinary herbs are native to the Mediterranean, where summers are warm and dry, winters are mild, and soil is poor and rocky. These plants are happy when snuggled against a warm rock, which retains heat at night but keeps roots cool by day. If you have a rock wall or retaining wall, you may be able to plant herbs in some of its crevices. The best herbs for planting in the crevices in rock walls are small plants that cling, creep, or droop. Good candidates include Corsican mint, Mentha raquienii, creeping rosemary, Rosmarinus prostratus, creeping sage, Salvia repens, creeping thyme, Thymus pracox subsp. Articus, minuses, elfin, dwarf Artemisia, Artemisia pontici. Stellarina silver brocade, dwarf lavender, Lavandula angustifolia. Jean Davis's, Rossi, Fifu, Danastum parthenium, golden mosses, golden ball, white stazes, oregano, Orignum vulgar compacta, Aurum crispum, pinks, Dianthus gratianopolitanus. Tiny rubies, D. Chinensis, Santolina, Santolina chama Paris asnana, violets, Viola spp. Or perhaps you'll decide to give herbs a rock home of their own. An alternative is to create a scree bed, in which you use coarse gravel to mimic a sunny hillside. Either build it on a natural incline or create a slope with large rocks and a mix of gravel and well-draining soil. The scree bed should be at least a foot deep. When planting the herbs, remove any potting soil from their roots. Then mulch the herbs with gravel and water generously for the first few weeks. Before long, the plants will take care of themselves. Under the big topiary. Topiary is the ancient art of clipping woody plants into shapes, spirals, pompons, wreaths, geometric patterns, even birds and animals. Most topiaries are appropriate only in formal gardens, although whimsical topiaries like cowboy boots and giraffes have a place in informal gardens. Topiaries are often grown in containers and make an especially nice feature as the centerpiece where paths intersect. When choosing a plan for topiary, look for evergreens with small, dense leaves that grow back rapidly after shearing, which makes them bushy. Among herbs, the most popular choices are bay, rosemary, and myrtle Myrtus communis. You may be able to create some simple topiaries, cone shapes for instance, by working freehand, but you'll find the job easier if you buy a wire frame or shape your own with chicken wire. After fitting the frame over the plant, or beside it, if you're creating a wreath or working with a vine, tie the plant's new, pliable stems to the frame with green twist ties or other soft material. Check frequently as your plant grows to make sure the old ties aren't too tight, retie them if necessary. After the plant covers its frame, you need to give the plant frequent haircuts. A specialized topiary that's easy to create with woody plants is called a standard, sort of a botanical lollipop with a single stem and a round head. Herbs that work well for standards include curry plant, lavender, lemon verbena, sage, and santolina. To make a standard, remove the plant's lower stems or branches, usually about 1 to 2/3 of the way up the stem, and then pinch back new growth on the rest of the plant to encourage bushiness. When the foliage at the top of the plant is large and dense enough, clip it into a ball shape. Gone fishing, moisture-loving herbs. If you already have a water garden, you may want to include some herbs in it. The following plants need standing water to flourish but don't need a big pond. In fact, you can even grow these herbs in a plastic-lined whiskey barrel or similar-sized container. Lotus, Nelumbo spp. Asians cook and pickle both the roots and seeds of the lotus, and drink rice wine through its stem. For a smaller pond, look for the American lotus, Nelumbo lutea, sometimes called pond nuts. It has yellow flowers and grows 21/2 to 5 feet tall. Sweet flag, Acorus calamus. Native Americans chewed the root of this iris for toothaches and boiled the root to treat burns. The Food and Drug Administration banned it as medicine after studies linked it to cancer. The variegated form is especially striking with its white-bearded foliage. Water chestnut, Trypanatans. This floating annual is the source of those crunchy white vegetables you get in Asian dishes. The plant is an annual with white flowers. The nuts are inside spiny black pods. Watercress, Nasturtium officinale, one of the few water plants that loves running water. Watercress is happy alongside a stream or waterfall and yields peppery leaves for salads or sandwiches. Herb gardeners often spend a good deal of time trying to make their soil drain better. See Chapter 7 for details on soil drainage. Fortunately, some herbs are happy in damp soil. Just remember that there's a difference between damp and soggy. These plants need plenty of moisture but won't put up with having their feet in standing water. Black cohosh, formerly Simicifuga racemosa, renamed Acta A. racemosa. This native perennial grows more than 6 feet tall and bears long spikes of off-white flower clusters. The roots are used to treat symptoms of menopause. Elderberry, Sambucus nigra. You may be familiar with elderberry wine, which is made from berries of this shrub. It has white umbels, flat-topped, umbrella-shaped clusters of tiny flowers, and its leaves are used to treat the flu. Horsetail, Ixostum spp. This grass-like perennial contains silica and can be used to scrub and polish metal. Grow it in a container or it will rump all over your garden. Male fern, Tritoris phylixmus. The ancient Greeks used the fronds of this 3 to 4 foot fern to expel worms. The male fern is a good-looking guy, too. Marshmallow, Althea officinalis, a 6-foot perennial with pale lilac flowers like those of a hibiscus. Marshmallow has roots known for their power to soothe sore throats, and they were traditionally the main ingredient in the confection we roast over bonfires. Swamp sunflower, Helianthus angustifolia. This moisture-loving perennial has 3-inch wide flowers similar to those of other wild sunflowers and grows 7 feet tall. Its seeds are not only rich in vitamin E but contain substances that relieve pain and inflammation. Water mint, Mentha aquatica. This herb smells like its landlubber kin. It will spread like them, too, if you don't keep it contained. Willow, Salix spp. The white willow, S. alba, whose bark is used as a painkiller, is too big for most gardens. Choose rosy gold pussy willow S. Gracilistla, or the black catkin willow, S. Melanus dishes. Both have interesting catkins but stay under 10 feet tall. Chapter 6 Herbs in Containers, Indoors and Out. In this chapter, picking the perfect pot, meeting the special needs of potted herbs. Successfully growing herbs indoors. Growing herbs in containers isn't just for gardeners with limited space. Picture a half-barrel planter overflowing with rosemary, thyme, sage, and tarragon right outside your kitchen door. Wouldn't you be more inclined to harvest a few sprigs for dinner than if you had to trudge out to the backyard? Besides, can you go out to the garden without stopping to pull a few weeds and deadhead a few flowers, forgetting the food that's burning on the stove? When you grow herbs in containers, you can play musical plants, try the potted rosemary in the perennial border for its visual pizzas, then scoot the container close to the barbecue for smoking bluefish, and finally, whisk it inside when winter's chill descends. Herbs adapt so well to containers that you can grow an impressive collection even if you have nowhere to garden but on a balcony or in a window box. Most annual herbs can thrive in pots for their brief span on earth, and many perennials also cotton to these cozy confines. Why containers? Even if you have a sprawling estate, consider containerizing some of your herbs for several good reasons. If you have heavy clay soil, pots provide better drainage. You can readily move tender plants, like basil, and tropicals like ginger, indoors. If your herbs seem unhappy, you can instantly put them in shadier, sunnier, wetter, or drier conditions. When you grow herbs in containers, you can have plants that have different soil and water requirements next to one another, in separate pots. And if you simply don't like the way your herbs are arranged, you can create new combinations in minutes, rather than hours, weeks, or months. By setting potted herbs on pedestals, stairs, concrete blocks, or old milk grates, you can bring them closer to your nose for sniffing, to your fingers for stroking, and to your pruners for harvesting. Container culture requires some new skills but also offers fun and new opportunities. Choosing and using containers. Just about anything that can hold soil can be used to grow herbs. We've all seen plants growing in unlikely pots, old boots, discarded watering cans, and the like. Whether you use purchased containers or create your own, keep the following 4 factors in mind. Drainage. Plant roots need oxygen, and that means they can't tolerate saturated soil. Many common herbs are especially sensitive to overly moist soil, including Mediterranean herbs like lavender, sage, and thyme. Make sure excess water can drain from containers via holes at the bottom of the pot. If you use saucers to catch excess water, drain them after watering. Porosity. Porous materials allow moisture and air to pass through them. Porous pots, such as wood and unglazed terracotta, are good choices for herbs that need good drainage. However, these containers also tend to dry out more quickly than non-porous ones. This is especially true if the pot is small or the plant is root-bound. Weight. Moist potting soil can be surprisingly heavy. Add in the weight of a heavy pot, and you end up with a container that's difficult to move. If you're planting large containers, look for lightweight pots made of plastic or resin. On the other hand, if you place lightweight pots filled with tough-heavy plants in a windy site, you'll spend a lot of time picking up toppled plants. Consider placing large, heavy pots on plant dollies, low platforms on heavy-duty casters, to make them easier to move. Size. For single plants of most culinary herbs, you need a pot 8 to 10 inches in diameter. A container 18 inches in diameter can hold 3 or 4 plants. Pots, unlike garden beds, restrict root growth. A too small pot is like a too small shoe, it cramps an herb's style. A too large pot, on the other hand, holds extra water that your plant won't use. Just as in an overstocked refrigerator, the excess can turn ugly and even make your plant sick. There used to be 2 basic choices in pots, clay or plastic. These days, garden centers devote almost as much display space to containers as they do to plants. Here's a rundown of some of the most popular types, along with their pros and cons. Clay pots. If you have heavy clay soil, you know what raw clay looks like. You can mold it into a shape and it becomes hard when it dries, and even harder if it's fired in a kiln. Clay pots are attractive, but fragile. If you happen to drop one while wrestling a potted Meyer lemon onto the sun porch in fall, for instance, it will break. They're heavy, so you don't have to worry about them tipping over in wind. Clay pots can be unglazed or glazed, Unglazed clay, especially the familiar orange-hued terracotta, has a natural, earthy look that blends with any decor. Because the material is porous, it breathes, so herbs growing in clay pots are less likely to get waterlogged, making them ideal for herbs that need relatively dry soil, like rosemary and lavender. On the flip side, the soil in unglazed clay pots dries out quickly, so plants need more frequent tending than those growing in non-porous containers. Bring these pots indoors in cold winter climates. Any water in the porous pots expands when it freezes, breaking the containers. If the pots are too large to move, protect them with a waterproof cover. Ditto concrete and stone pots. Glazed, to add color and sheen and make containers waterproof, potters apply glazes, silica-based coatings that, upon firing at high temperatures in a kiln, harden and adhere to the surface. Glazed pots are non-porous and available in a rainbow of colors. Although they don't absorb water like unglazed clay, it's still a good idea to bring glazed pots indoors or cover them in winter because soil left in the pot can freeze and expand, cracking the pot. Wood window boxes made of wood are charming, until you try to grow something in them. The relatively small soil mass plus wood's porosity means these window boxes dry out very quickly. Save wood for large containers like half barrels. Use a waterproof liner, with a few drainage holes, in small wooden containers to conserve moisture. Plastic pots are no longer synonymous with tacky. You can find a range of inoffensive colors, including some that look a lot like terracotta. Plastic weighs less than clay, so moving these pots is easier. Plastic isn't porous, so any plants growing in plastic pots need watering less often. Make sure that excess water can drain freely. Resin, fiberglass, and polypropylene often made to look like terracotta or glazed clay. Containers made from these synthetic materials have certain advantages over the real deal. They're lightweight and won't break if you drop them. Some are soft and dent easily, others have a hard shell that can take a reasonable amount of abuse. Self-watering containers. Small pots dry out quickly and may need daily watering. That means no weekend trips to the beach unless you hire plant sitters. Or you use self-watering pots like the one shown in Figure 61. These pots contain a reservoir and a delivery system that brings the water to the plant, usually some type of wicking material. You may need to fill the reservoir every few days, but it's better than having to water several times a day. Experiment with different types of soil mixes, because their ability to draw water from the reservoir can vary depending upon the ingredients in the mix. You can purchase self-watering pots or buy kits to convert regular pots into self-watering ones. Creative containers. Before you plunk down hard-earned cash for new containers, take a look around your home and neighborhood. You'll see potential containers when you start looking outside the box. Check out your attic, flea markets, and yard sales. Herbs, in particular, look wonderful in anything that spells old. Use your imagination when choosing a growing pot. The following list is incomplete, but it shows that you can use almost anything to grow herbs. Just make sure the pot has drainage holes in the bottom. If not, use it as a cash pot. See the next section. Old coffee cans or tins from olive oil or other foods. Imported brands have the most panache. Decorative metal cookie and popcorn containers. Those without lids are almost free at flea markets. You can easily punch holes in the bottom of these containers, but they'll rust out eventually. Pottery, such as cookie jars. Pottery is more expensive than tins but longer lasting. Make drainage holes with an electric drill equipped with a masonry bit. Practice first on the chipped casserole dish from your ex-mother-in-law. Flue tiles, used to line chimneys. These rectangular clay tubes can be cut to lengths of 12 or 18 inches to make instant raised beds for individual herbs. Children's toys, such as sand buckets and trucks. Metal toys look more charming but are now valuable collector's items. Plastic can be quirky. Work boots, like baby shoes. These boots get their appeal from the creases of hardware. If they come from a beloved's foot, even better. Watering cans, Glossy garden magazines with country in the title show these cans sprouting herbs and other plants. Pretty nifty, but the spout and handle take up extra room if your space is tight. Seashells, unless you go beachcombing in more exotic places than we do, you won't often pick up conches and other shells roomy enough for anything bigger than a seedling. Fortunately, such natural treasures often become yard sale bargains when the neighbor's kids head for college. Hollow logs. These items rarely last longer than a season, and drainage is a problem, but if it's the rustic look you seek, the price is right. Old galvanized metal buckets and tubs, a few dents and dings only give these metal objects more personality, and they last virtually forever. Whiskey barrels. These oak containers are probably used for plants more than they're used for bourbon. Rugged, handsome, and big enough for small trees, they rot eventually. Extend their lives by placing them on bricks and lining them with an old trash bag, but remember to include enough holes for drainage. Cashpot's a fancy word for a simple idea. A cashpot is a decorative outer container. If that black nursery pot is exactly the right size, leave the rosemary plant in it and hide the plastic in one of the growing pots suggested in the preceding list or in one of the following. Use sphagnum moss to obscure the top of the growing pot. Consider these decorative containers, wood crates and boxes. Herbs look down home and funky arranged in recycled wooden containers, such as fruit crates, packing crates, or antique toolboxes. Lengthen their lives by giving them a coat of polyurethane. Baskets. Every garage sale has a surfeit of old baskets in endless shapes and sizes. You can employ deeper baskets as a surround for larger herbs or group small pots in a shallower one. Wheelbarrows, often serving as centerpieces in herb gardens, these small vehicles can do double duty as planters or plant holders. Window boxes. You can put your herbs right in your window box, see figure 62, of course, but their roots won't get tangled if you leave them in separate pots. This planting approach also makes it easier to pull out spent herbs and replace them with new ones. Choosing soil mixes and fertilizers. When you grow herbs in containers, you need to handle the essentials, soil, water, and fertilizer, a bit differently than you would if you were growing the same plants in the ground. The Unreal Dirt Potting Mix is a lot like pesto, such a simple affair with so few basic ingredients, yet all gardeners have their favorite recipe. Today, almost everyone starts with a soilless mix, whether straight from the bag, amended slightly, or homemade from raw ingredients. Never use soil straight from the garden for growing plants in containers. Garden soil is too heavy, compacts readily, and often contains weed seeds or disease organisms. The easiest approach to filling containers with a healthy planting medium is to buy a bagged, high-quality potting mix. A good mix has a balance of water-holding capacity and drainage. Here's a rundown of materials you might see on the label and why they're used. These materials help hold water. Sphagnum peat, partly decomposed organic material harvested from ancient bogs in Canada and the United States. Peat is difficult to wet initially, but once it's moist, it helps bind other ingredients together. Peat is also acidic, so soil mixes containing peat usually contain limestone or dolomitic limestone to neutralize the acidity. Coir. Coir is residue from coconut shells. Because coir is a renewable resource, it's becoming popular as a substitute for peat. Compost. Compost is decomposed vegetable matter. Leaf mold, another name for composted leaves, and composted bark are two common ingredients in potting mixes. Water-retaining polymer. These crystals absorb many times their weight in water and slowly release it back to plants as the soil mix dries. Soil mixes that contain these crystals remain too wet for some herbs like the Mediterranean herbs, so experiment before using them in all your containers. These materials provide drainage. Perlite. These tiny white pellets come from crushed volcanic rock that has been heated. Vermiculite. These silvery flakes are derived from expanding mica. Vermiculite is great for starting seeds, but it compacts more quickly than perlite in long-term plantings. Sand. Sand was once a standard ingredient in most potting mixes, but experts now debate whether or not sand belongs in a container. Sand is heavy. Mix some into potting soil to weigh down a container that's too heavy. Primose and dry soil mixes by stirring in some warm water an hour or so before you plan to use them, so the water has time to be absorbed through the mix. Mixing it up, you can look for specialty mixes or doctor up a standard mix to suit different herbs. A basic, soilless potting mix consists of 1 part each of peat, vermiculite, and perlite with a little limestone thrown in. For succulents, such as aloe, an essential herb for your kitchen windowsill, where you can grab a stem for treating minor burns, look for soil mixes formulated for cactuses or add some extra perlite into a basic mix. A tropical plant like ginger, on the other hand, likes a more humus-rich soil, so you might add some compost to the basic mix. You can also add fertilizer to the mix. Slow-release formulas, such as Osmocut, break down slowly, releasing nutrients to plants over the course of a few months. Organic slow-release blends often include kelp, alfalfa, and fish meals. A final reminder, potting mix is like bath water. You need to toss it after it has been used. If you're raising annual herbs, recycle the contents of your containers at the end of the growing season. As long as the plant wasn't diseased, add it and the soil mix to the compost pile. If you're growing perennial herbs in containers, repot them, or at least refresh the potting mix they're growing in, every 2 or 3 years. And no drainer. It's crucial that your pots have drainage holes. But make sure they don't allow too much drainage so that water gushes out and takes soil with it. To help hold soil in, put a piece of old window screen or a scrap of landscape fabric in the bottom of the pot. Drainage holes located on the bottom of a pot are useless if the pot is on a surface that impedes water flow, such as a concrete walkway. Prop up the pot with bricks, wood blocks, or decorative pot feet to allow water to drain freely. If your pot sits on a wood deck or any other surface that can stain or rot, place a saucer under the pot to catch runoff water. Just remember to empty it regularly. Make sure the saucer is at least as wide as the pot's rim in case there's any overflow when you're watering. And remember that terracotta saucers are porous and become damp. They'll ruin wood, carpet, and other surfaces unless you place a non-porous material under them or coat them with polyurethane. Beware of plastic hanging baskets that come with attached saucers. The saucers are invariably too small, and water will quickly stream out onto whatever is below. If you can strategically locate your hanging basket over a big planter and you don't mind a bit of splash, it's a nice water-saving trick. Now, the easy pot, putting it all together. You have a container. You have a bucket of primose and planting mix. You have a plant. Now what? 1. Lift the herb out of its seed tray or tap it out of its nursery container, and examine the roots. If the roots are coiled, badly tangled, or crowded, the plant is root-bound. It's been growing in a too small container for too long. Try to loosen and spread the roots before repotting the plant. If the plant isn't root-bound, don't disturb the root ball. 2. Add a base layer of potting mix to the new container, firming it gently. Adjust the depth of this base layer by placing the plant's root ball on the soil's surface. Add or remove soil until the top of the root ball sits an inch or so below the rim of the pot. 3. Holding the plant upright, add potting mix all around the plant. Fill in around the root ball, firming it gently as you go, until it's level with the surface of the root ball. 4. Set the pot in a tray of room temperature water for several hours or water it gently from above. This will settle the potting mix so it makes good contact with the root ball. 5. Let any excess water drain. If necessary, add more potting mix to reach a level of 1 inch below the top of the pot and water again. Figure 63 shows a properly planted herb. How dry I am. Most plants that fail in containers placed outdoors do so for lack of water. Heavy spring rains can lure gardeners into complacency. This tendency is especially true with easygoing, low-water plants like herbs. The sun will come up tomorrow. and it will rain a couple times this week, right? Then comes August, a week at the beach, and an adolescent house sitter. Plan on watering outdoor containers every day from mid to late summer, more often and for a longer period of time if you live in an arid climate or if the weather is windy. Gardeners in hot regions also should avoid planting in small containers, which dry out too quickly. You may not need to water daily, but set aside the time so you get into the habit of doing it. Take a look at these tricks to cut down on watering: mulch, organic mulches, bark, compost, or shredded leaves, on the surface of the potting mix. Slow evaporation, retaining moisture. Because you can't see whether the soil is dry, poke under the mulch with your finger to test whether it's time to water. Pebbles or gravel, on the other hand, tend to absorb heat and may dry out the mix faster. Polymers, these absorbent crystals swell up like gelatin when wet and then release the water gradually. Follow directions carefully. If you use too much, your herb roots will suffocate in a mass of goo. Drip systems, if you have many valuable herbs, you can invest in a drip irrigation system with timers and little tubes that drip water into individual containers, like the one in Figure 64. Watering wands. These extension devices attach to a hose for watering hanging baskets. A great tool, but because you can water the basket without lowering it, and without seeing or feeling the soil, using a wand can encourage overwatering. Fertilizer. A strict diet. Herbs are, by and large, strict dieters. Like supermodels, they become soft and vulnerable when overfed. But because most soilless mixes are the equivalent of bread and water, that's white bread, you need to feed them some chicken and broccoli periodically. We didn't raise our children on potato chips, and we don't give our container plants junk food either. Give the potted plants the same healthy, organic stuff that you would the herbs in your planting beds. Many different formulations are available, including fast release for quick pick-ups and slow release for long-lasting results. For herbs growing in containers, we use half the recommended amount in monthly doses. Surviving the big chill. When it comes to enduring cold winters, growing herbs in containers has its challenges and benefits. Plants growing in containers aren't as cold hardy as those growing in the ground. In the garden, soil temperatures may dip into the 20s and 30s, but the sheer mass of the soil keeps it from getting any colder. However, when air temperatures dip below zero, the soil in containers, having less mass, may get nearly as cold as air temperatures. Roots of even the hardiest plants can't take that extreme cold. If you're growing annual herbs like basil, you can just toss plants at the end of the season, or bring them inside in late summer. Perennial herbs require some special care. One big plus to growing plants in containers is that you can move them around. If an early cold snap threatens, move the containers into a sheltered place until the weather warms up again. Then, when winter really starts to dig in its heels, you can move the containers to a sheltered place to spend the winter, a cool porch, for example. As a rule, you can leave perennial herbs outdoors in containers all winter if they're hardy to 1 or 2 zones further north than your home. If you live in USDA Zone 6, for example, choose perennial herbs that are hardy to zones 4 or 5 if you want to winter them outdoors. Another way to overwinter perennial herbs is to bury them. In fall, dig holes for the containers of your perennial herbs and tuck them in for their winter sleep, backfilling around the containers with soil and covering the tops with a comforter of leaves. A cold frame is handy for this, as is a nursery bed, a small tilled garden that you use in spring for starting seeds and in summer for healing in, or temporarily planting, new perennials and other plants. One caveat: if you live in the far north, you may be growing herbs that won't survive even with this coddling. The section titled Gimme Shelter in this chapter has more on bringing herbs indoors. Ideas for outdoor container combos to whet your container appetite. We're sharing a few of our favorite outdoor container plantings. Once you get started, we're sure you'll come up with your own favorite combinations. The whiskey sour barreled the half barrel in Figure 65 may make you pucker up, not because it's lovable, but because all the herbs in it are not lemon-scented or lemon-flavored. The figure also illustrates principles that apply to planting any large container with a group of herbs. For example, choose plants that require similar cultural conditions, the same amounts of light and water, the same kind of soil. Put a vertical or spiky plant in the center, or at the back if the container will be against the wall. In this case, we've used the old-fashioned lemon daylily, Hemerocorlis lilioasphodilus. If you prefer something you can use in the kitchen, substitute lemongrass. Save room around the rim for at least one plant that flops becomingly over the side. Lemon thyme, Thymus x citriodorus, is usually described as upright, but you can persuade it to droop earthward. Or look for Doon Valley, a creeping cultivar with gold variegation. You can grow many other lemon plants, including lemon balm, a hardy 2-foot member of the mint family, lemon catnip, Nepetacateria var. Citriodora, and even a lemon marigold, Tagetes tenuifolia lemon gem. For you die-hard lemon lovers, here are a few more. Lemon geraniums, look for Pelargonium limnum, P. Frencham lemon, which is unmistakably citrus, P. Crispum fingerbowl lemon, which boasts tiny crinkled leaves, and P. Crispum variegatum with handsome green and white leaves. Lemon bee balm, Monida citriodora, grows 1-2 feet high and has pink-purple flowers. The Hopus used it to flavor game, you can use it for tea. Lemon basil, look for 2 cultivars of Ocimum basilicum var. Citriodorum Mrs. Burns's or Sweet Darney, which won the respected All-America Selection Award in 1998. Lemon trees, like lemon verbena, lemon eucalyptus, Eucalyptus citriodora, and Maya lemon, Citrus ex Mary, trees have to come indoors in winter. Try one or the other in the center of your arrangement, with pots of smaller lemon herbs at its feet. All in a row, a trio or quartet, or nonette, or more, of identical pots filled with different herbs creates a unified display, as in Figure 66. You can create your own pizza herb container garden by planting basil, marjoram, oregano, parsley, and thyme in different pots. Or combine the basil and parsley in one pot. They like moist soil, and marjoram, oregano, and thyme in a different pot. They prefer soil on the drier side. Create your own Simon & Garfunkel garden with parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme. Or maybe a salsa garden, with cilantro and a few hot and sweet pepper plants. High hanging baskets are another striking way to display herbs, if you have a good place to hang them, as shown in Figure 67. While Victorian porches are a great place for hanging ferns, all that cool shade, and smack under the eaves of a house is a great place for baskets of succulents, all that protection from rain. Most herbs need a sunny home where they can benefit from an occasional shower. An ideal place for hanging baskets is a pergola, an arbor-like structure that consists of a series of upright supports topped by horizontal beams. You can hang baskets not only from the overheads, but on hooks attached to the uprights, as well. Don't hang your baskets so high that you can't reach them to water. Pinch off dead flowers and stems, or harvest occasionally. And don't hang them so low that all friends have to duck under them. As for the containers themselves, ceramic pots are too heavy to hang, and unglazed terracotta pots dry out even faster in the air than they do on the ground. Wire baskets lined with sheets of sphagnum moss dry out quickly, too. Plastic, fiberglass, polypropylene, and resin pots are lightweight and waterproof, making them good choices. Look for self-watering baskets to make watering chores easier. As tenants for your hanging basket, choose herbs that don't grow too tall. Look especially for plants that dangle gracefully, ones with words like creeping and prostrate in their names. Some good candidates for hanging baskets are catmint, Nepeta spp. Creeping golden oregano, Orignum vulgarorum, creeping rosemary, Rosmarinus officinus prostratus, Lockwood deforest, Huntington carpet, Cantala, creeping savory, Satyriaripandra, creeping thyme, especially Thymus citriodorus, Doon Valley and silver needle thyme, T. Schleriades, curly parsley, Petroslinum crispum triple curled, Dittany of Crete, Orignum dictamnus, Trailing nasturtium, Trapeolum majusculum and whirlbird ceres. If plants don't hang down enough initially, you can train woody stems, such as thymes, by tying fishing weights to them. Growing herbs indoors. Several years ago, co-author Kathy asked a nationally known herb expert which herbs grow best indoors. It was a brief chat. "You can't grow herbs indoors," he responded. Later, we learned that he is notoriously cranky on many subjects. We also learned that he wasn't far off the mark. Don't get us wrong. You can grow herbs indoors. In fact, you can grow many beautiful tropical herbs that you can't grow outdoors unless you live just a short swim from Central America. And you can keep others alive, hanging in there for a few weeks of hard winter until you can safely move them back outside again. But herbs are not philodendrons or even African violets. In other words, they aren't a snap to grow inside. This section shows you which ones will feel at home in the family room and how to increase your chances of success with some of the more finicky types. What really works? Of course, you can try growing herbs indoors, especially if you live in a climate where the growing season is about as long as a sneeze. You can savor fresh flavors and heavenly scents year-round. Herbs aren't just for 4th of July cookouts. Rosemary, bay, and bayberry are as closely associated with the Yuletide as mistletoe and balsam firs. Indoor gardening isn't any more difficult than outdoor gardening, it's just different. In the case of herbs, you have to make sure that the timer has turned on your grow lights. You also have to be vigilant. Herbs that are almost never troubled by insects and diseases in the garden are easy targets when grown indoors. The bare bones essential for growing herbs indoors is artificial light. But even when you provide that, many plants balk at confinement, like kids in a classroom. Some herbs are too tall to grow under lights, some have deep taproots, some require a period of chilling or complete dormancy during the winter months. With other herbs, it's a matter of what we might call quality of life, for both of you. They'll survive, yes. You'll have enough parsley to garnish your lemon chicken but not enough to make tabbouleh. You'll have a sprig of basil to impart some personality to that grocery store tomato. But pesto? Forget it. Forget, too, any herbs that you're growing for flowers, fruits, or seeds, such as fennel or dill. Getting plants that far along indoors is impossible without a greenhouse. And darn hard even with one. Gimme shelter. Many tender perennial herbs must come indoors during winter in the colder regions of North America. Leaf aloe, bay, ginger, lemon verbena, rosemary, scented geraniums, and many more, outside in December and January, and all you'll have left in spring are a few dead stems and a pot of soil to dump on the compost pile. Only a handful of herbs appear consistently on everyone's list of indoor favorites. Bay adapts fairly well to being indoors, yet for some it dies. However, if your bay, a symbol of honor, dies, evil may descend on your household, at least according to folklore. Following are a few of the herbs that most gardeners must haul inside when the mercury dips. Lemon verbena can be a good indoor herb, but you should know that after you've wrestled it inside, your plant will ungraciously drop all its leaves. Don't panic, and don't fertilize. Because lemon verbena is deciduous, it's supposed to lose its leaves in autumn, so it's just going to sit there for a while and look ugly. Let it get a bit dry, and keep an eye open for spider mites and whiteflies. Resume fertilizing and watering in early spring. Rosemary is the summer vacation romance that palls when autumn comes around. Without gentle zephyrs and sunlight, and with too much fawning from a well-meaning owner, the death blow is usually root rot from too much water. Use a soil high in perlite, and keep it just barely damp. It also goes to meet its maker if it gets bone dry. Scented geraniums do well inside. They need plenty of light, good air circulation, daytime temperatures around 70 degrees Fahrenheit, and ideally, nighttime temperatures slightly cooler, around 60 degrees Fahrenheit. And they'll struggle through winter. In their search for sunshine, many plants get leggy and impossibly tall and lean like Ichabod crane, so prune stem tips frequently to keep them bushy. Pinching off the ends tells the buds further down on the branch to start growing. Gardeners have moderately good luck with growing these herbs indoors: Artemisia, basil, catnip, chives, customary, curry plant, germander, ginger, lemon balm, marjoram, Aurignum majorana, mint, oregano, parsley, rue, santolina. Winter savory. Caring for herbs indoors. So you've picked out a few herbs that you think deserve to share your humble home. Now think of your abode as a bed and breakfast and sometime clinic for plants. Herbs reward you with their pleasant company, but you do need to cater to their appetites and whims. Moving day psychologists say that for humans, moving to a new home is one of those events, like weddings and births, that's highly stressful, even when happy. The same is true for plants. Moving is a big change. When you take plants from outdoors to indoors, they adapt by producing a different type of foliage, leaves that can make sugars and carbohydrates efficiently in lower light. An abrupt move makes their current outdoor leaves turn yellow and drop off or become brown around the edges. You can ease your herbs' transition by moving them under a tree, an overhang, or a shelter of shade cloth, a mesh material available from garden shops or online, for a few days or a week. While the plants are in the transition area, check them carefully for any sign of insects. If you see any, try the pest management treatments we talk about in the section in Sickness and in Health, later in this chapter. You also need to reduce both fertilizer and water. Less fertilizer slows high-energy top growth, but the roots will keep growing. Drier soil hardens off the foliage, preparing it to cope with your home's drier environment. If you want to start new herb plants indoors, a quick crop of basil, for example, see Chapter 8, which tells you how to sow seeds indoors. Bright lights, big payoff in providing light for your indoor plants. The goal is to mimic the light spectrum of the sun as closely as possible. Several indoor light gardens, special plant stands that have light fixtures suspended over each shelf, are on the market. Most gardeners use regular fluorescent bulbs, ideally a mix of warm white bulbs, to provide light from the red end of the sun's spectrum, and cool white bulbs, for the blue end. Alternatively, you can look for fixtures that use T5 high-output fluorescent bulbs that provide full-spectrum light. Avoid incandescent bulbs, they give off too much heat. You can make your own light garden by purchasing a standard shop light fixture that holds two bulbs under a hood so the light is directed down at your plants instead of out into the room. The bulbs should be no farther than 6 inches apart. Most of these fixtures hang from a chain or cable, which enables you to move them higher or lower. For seedlings and cuttings, the lights should be only a few inches away from the plants. Mature herbs should be about 10 to 12 inches away from the lights. Give your herbs 14 to 16 hours of light daily by plugging the light fixture into an inexpensive timer. Air of superiority. Good air circulation is also essential to growing herbs indoors, where plants need air movement but not gale force winds or even a cold draft. To encourage cross-ventilation, keep the door of the room where they're growing open. And don't crowd plants together. Space them far enough from their neighbors so their leaves don't touch. If your house or apartment is well sealed, use a small tabletop fan to get the air moving. Because the air in most homes is very dry, especially in winter, set your containers in trays lined with pebbles and filled with an inch or so of water. The herbs should sit over the water, not in it. Some may like it hot, but most herbs like it cool, around 68 degrees Fahrenheit during the day. Nighttime temperatures should be 5 to 10 degrees lower. Make sure that the leaves of plants sitting on a windowsill don't touch the glass. If the window pane freezes, so will the leaves. Eating and drinking. Just as outdoor containers tend to suffer from too little water, indoor plants often get too much. Plants that are growing rapidly use more water, but many perennial herbs go semi-dormant or completely dormant in winter. These plants need much less water than they did in summer. Watering on a once-a-week schedule may help you remember, but like a good waiter or waitress, you should inquire first as to whether your service is needed. Water most herbs only when the soil surface is dry. Other watering tips: water less often if your home is cool or if your herbs are growing in plastic pots rather than clay. Water less often if plants seem to be ailing. Rapid growth adds to their stress. Don't let your plant sit in a saucer of water. Don't shock plants with cold tap water. Water should be tepid, about room temperature. Let tap water sit overnight to dispel much of the chlorine. Observation is key. Some plants are simply thirstier than others. For example, basil seems to need even more water when grown indoors than it does outdoors. Use less fertilizer, and use it less frequently, indoors than you would outdoors, because most plants are growing more slowly. If you're using fish or seaweed emulsion, which we recommend, this will be a relief, because they can smell of last week's halibut. Give the plants a monthly shot at 1/5 the recommended dose. If the smell bothers you, put the plants on a tray and whisk them to a warm porch or garage at mealtime, or look for formulas described as odorless and hope for the best. In sickness and in health, dry heat, overwatering, and especially the proximity of neighbors mean that when pests strike indoor plants, damage can spread like a plague. Vigilance is a must. Although the list of indoor pests is shorter than the list of outdoor foes, some of these enemies are extremely difficult to control. Aphids, spider mites, and whiteflies are fond of herbs with succulent foliage and stems. Bay and other woody plants are likely homes for scale. Mealybugs are equal opportunity enemies. For more information about the insects and diseases that attack herbs, and how to combat them, see Chapter 10. Integrated Pest Management, or IPM, is a practice in which you first do everything you can to prevent plant problems, and then take progressively more drastic steps to correct them. Here's our IPM approach to gardening indoors. 1. Keep it clean. Remove dry leaves and other debris. Use clean containers and potting mix, and clean the surfaces on which plants sit. 2. Don't crowd plants. Allow enough space between plants for good air circulation. This helps minimize disease problems and makes it more challenging for pests to jump from one plant to the next. 3. Don't over-fertilize plants. Rapid growth makes plants weak and susceptible to disease and pests. 4. Isolate anything you bring indoors, cut flowers or new plants, for at least 2 weeks. Isolate any herbs that become infested while you're treating them, and don't put them near other plants until you're sure you have the pest under control. 5. If plants become badly infested, consider getting rid of them. Unless plants are particularly valuable, either money-wise or for sentimental reasons, sometimes it's best to start over with fresh, healthy plants. 6. At the first sign of insect pests, begin spraying the plant frequently with water. You can control some insect pests by simply knocking them off the plants with a stream of water. Wash small plants in the kitchen sink, bring larger ones into the shower for a good hosing down. Make sure to wash the undersides of the leaves, too. Let extra water drain from soil. To keep from drowning or dislodging the soil, cover it with aluminum foil. 7. Dab infested areas with a cotton swab dipped in rubbing alcohol. This is especially effective on mealybugs and scale insects. 8. Try spraying with insecticidal soap. Follow the directions on the label, and be sure to cover the entire plant, including the undersides of the leaves. Note whether it's safe for edibles. 9. Sticky traps not only help control flying pests but also show you how heavy the infestation is. These are colored pieces of plastic or cardboard coated with a sticky substance to catch pests. Different colors attract different pests. 10. To smother insects, try summer weight, light, horticultural oil. This is especially effective for scale insects.